In February of 2025, a courtroom just outside Istanbul handed down a sentence of 45,376 years and 6 months in prison. Not to one man, to two. The number is so large, it stops meaning anything. You can't serve 45,000 years, nobody can. And that's kind of the point. Because before this was a courtroom, it was a farm, a digital one. Buy a virtual cow, buy a virtual plot of land, and watch your money supposedly grow into a real dairy operation in rural Turkey. Over 132,000 people bought in. Together, they handed over more than 1 billion Turkish lira. And the man who took it? While people back home were begging for their money back, he was posting videos of himself behind the wheel of a Ferrari in Uruguay. This is the story of Ciftlik Bank, the FarmVille clone that became one of the largest fraud cases in Turkish history, and the man behind it, known to millions simply as Tosuncuk. Mehmet Aydin was born on May 31, 1991, in the Nilüfer district of Bursa, in northwestern Turkey. His family's roots trace back to Espia, on the Black Sea coast. There was nothing about his early life that suggested he'd end up here. According to Turkey's own social security records, before he founded anything, Aydin worked as a dishwasher in the kitchen of an entertainment venue. Before that, he'd tried his hand at music, releasing rap tracks under stage names like Ego Man and Aaron Çakar. None of it stuck. What did stick was an image, a friendly, unpolished, relatable guy who talked like he was letting you in on something, not selling you something. He started calling himself an entrepreneur, a self-taught software developer, a businessman. And he built an online following around that persona, one that would later carry his nickname, Tosuncuk. Roughly, chubby guy. A nickname that sounds harmless, that was the appeal. His older brother, Fatih Aydin, would become his partner in what came next, and eventually, his co-defendant. In August of 2016, Mehmet Aydin founded a company through northern Cyprus called Çiftlik Bank, Farm Bank. The app launched to the public on July 31, 2016, and at first glance, it looked exactly like FarmVille, the social media game that millions of people had already spent years playing for free. You bought digital animals, you planted digital crops, you built a digital farm. Except, this wasn't free, and it wasn't just a game. Aydin's pitch was simple. The money you spent inside the app wasn't just points on a screen. It was actually funding real farms, real livestock, real production, back in Turkey. He talked about building what he called Europe's biggest dairy farm. In return, investors were promised a cut of the profits, real money, from real milk, honey, and meat. Here's the number that should have stopped everyone in their tracks. Deposit around 200,000 lira, and Aydin promised a monthly return of about 50,000 lira. Do that math for a year, and you're being promised returns no legitimate agricultural business on earth generates. It wasn't a farm. It was arithmetic that only works one way. Pay old investors with new investors' money. A textbook Ponzi scheme, just wearing a cartoon cow costume. And Aydin had something most Ponzi schemes don't: an audience that already trusted him. People weren't hearing this pitch from a stranger in a suit. They were hearing it from a guy they already followed online. A guy who felt like a friend giving them a tip. That parasocial trust is what let Ciftlik Bank grow as fast as it did. By the time it was over, roughly 132,222 people had put money in. Together, they'd handed over more than 1,139,000,000 Turkish lira. Every Ponzi scheme runs on the same fuel. New money coming in faster than old money has to go out. and every Ponzi scheme eventually runs out of fuel. By late 2017, the payouts started slowing down. Then they started stopping altogether. People who went looking for the real farms Aydin had promised found something very different. Mostly show sites, small operations with nowhere near the capacity to produce what had been advertised. In March of 2018, Turkish authorities opened a formal investigation into Çiftlik Bank as a Ponzi scheme. Assets were seized. Some executives were arrested. Mehmet Aydin and his brother Fatih were not among them. Sometime in 2018, both brothers left Turkey, reportedly for Uruguay, allegedly taking a share of the money with them. For years, Mehmet Aydin was one of Turkey's most wanted men, subject to an international manhunt and an Interpol red notice. And for years it looked like it might work. Right up until he got spotted living in luxury in Uruguay, driving a Ferrari. Not exactly the profile of a man in hiding. His brother Fatih was separately detained in Uruguay in July of 2021. On June 30th, 2021, Mehmet Aydin posted a video announcing he would surrender. The next day, July 1st, he walked into the Turkish consulate in Sao Paulo, Brazil. By July 3rd, Brazilian authorities had processed his extradition, and in the early hours of July 4th, 2021, he landed at Istanbul airport under heavy security. Asked why he came back, Aydin's answer was that he'd been free abroad, and he returned because he was innocent. Worth sitting with that claim for a second, given everything that came before it and everything that came after. The case against Aydin and his brother was massive. 20 defendants, spread across 5 separate case files. In September of 2024, prosecutors reportedly sought a sentence for Mehmet Aydin of up to 88,302 years. Then, on February 3, 2025, Istanbul's Anadolu 6th Heavy Penal Court delivered its verdict. Mehmet and Fatih Aydin were each convicted on 4,414 separate counts, covering fraud committed through information systems, money laundering, and founding a criminal organization. The sentence? 45,376 years and 6 months in prison, each, plus a fine of more than 496 million lira. So, why isn't that number a typo? Under Turkish law, sentences for individual offenses get added together rather than capped as one combined charge. When you're convicted of committing the same fraud against 4,414 separate instances, the math stacks up fast. The number isn't really a timeline, it's a running tally of harm. One count for every time this happened to someone. In practice, actual time served works very differently. Standard fixed sentences in Turkey are typically served at around half their length. And for aggravated life sentences specifically, the law generally caps how much consecutive time actually gets served, often around 30 years, though that protection can disappear entirely when the sentence stems from organized crime, which is exactly the charge here. What that means for Aydin's real release date isn't fully settled, and it's one of the more contested threads of this case going forward. Either way, 45,000 years was never meant to be served. It was meant to be understood. Behind the number are the actual people it represents. Over 132,000 of them by the official count, many of whom put in savings they'd spent years building, chasing a return that was never real. The story didn't end with the verdict. In November of 2025, Aydin sent a handwritten letter from prison to his victims. In it, he claimed that Bitcoin-related operations in Uruguay and Paraguay were still active, and said he'd repay victims if he were released to house arrest instead. Notice the pattern. A relatable persona built to earn trust, a structure that could never mathematically work, a disappearance the moment the money stopped flowing, and now, from behind bars, another promise. Ciftlik Bank isn't really a story about a farming app. It's a case study in something much older, affinity fraud, dressed up in whatever costume fits the decade, a trusted face, an implausible return, and a story just plausible enough to make people stop asking questions. Different names, different countries, same 3 ingredients, over and over again. So the next time someone you already trust online tells you about a can't-miss investment, ask yourself the question this case answers so clearly. If the math doesn't work, it doesn't matter who's explaining it to you. If stories like this one interest you, subscribe for more deep dives into financial fraud and the people behind it. And let us know in the comments, which scam should we break down next?